Welcome to the Forest School Podcast, a show where I, Lewis, and my co-host, Wem Southerner, set out to explore a shared pedagogy. It's a space where cerebral thinking matters more than craptivities, where educational purpose outweighs pretty resources, and where inclusion is more than just a buzzword. Join us as we overthink the trivial, deep dive into whatever sparks our dopamine, and reflect on what it means to truly hold space for others, holistically and without judgment. Thanks for being here. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, we're here. We've got Dr Alistair Bryce-Clegg with us, who, do all kinds of things, don't you? You do, particularly early years, I would say, is your focus.
Yeah, early years is my definite specialism, yeah.
Amazing. I see you all over LinkedIn and different places like that. And as you just said before we started recording, serial podcast guest. But for people who haven't come across your name, I've got a few of your books as well, actually. So how do you define what your kind of career is? What's your vibes?
Ultimately, I suppose I'm going to start by saying I'm a dad, but now a dad to three men in their 20s, and now I'm a granddad to two grandsons. That's an important part of who I am, because I think that very much defines, when you've got your own children in the world, that very much defines how you view it slightly differently. I am ultimately the child of a teacher, so I was born and brought up in a teaching household, but my mum was a Key Stage 2 Year 6 teacher, which is where I thought all the good stuff happened, because she told me that. And to be fair, lots of schools that I work with now also think that's where all the good stuff happens. And I ended up in early years by accident. So I went to train to teach, and was very explicit that I didn't want to work with infants, because why would you? Because they're just little and annoying and they can't do anything other than wipe your nose down your trouser leg. And I was told I had to do an infant placement because it was a primary teaching course. So the agreement was, get it out of the way first, then move into Key Stage 2 where all the good stuff happens. And that was my life plan until I did that very first placement, which was in reception now 6 years ago. And it just literally changed everything, because I felt honestly like I found where I belonged, and it was an unexpected delight. So I specialised in early years and infants, ended up becoming a head teacher for a decade of a 3-form entry school. I opened the northwest of England's first purpose-built early years unit way back in 2001. And for the past 15 years, I've had the great privilege to travel the globe, literally working with early years practitioners and children kind of 7 and under. So everything from church halls to massive academies and everything in between. And a lot of my life is just spent researching and writing about the truth around authentic child development and trying to get that message out, especially often in many countries under a political umbrella that kind of is squeezing the childhood out of childhood. And so it's trying to kind of fight that fight.
Great. And we wanted to speak to you, especially about the kind of political climate here in the UK and a lot of the messages we're hearing coming out about early years recently. And we started to talk about that a little bit before we pressed record. We were like, hang on, wait, we've got to stop and record some of this. So can you paint a picture? Some people might have become aware of quite a lot of statements coming on about early years needing reform because children aren't school ready and things like this. But can you, for those people who might not be quite so aware of that, can you paint a picture about what's been going on recently?
Absolutely. And I did a really good job then of working on my face. I think the thing I learned most about being a consultant is that you have to work on your face, because my face is not very good at that. So I'm less good with the family, but I'm better in a professional circumstances.
I talk about it and you say it's like facial subtitles.
Yes.
You might be saying one thing, but the subtitles on your face are saying it.
I worked really hard then to maintain a neutral face. I had to really concentrate. So this, yes, absolutely. This is not new. So this is new for this government. And currently in the UK, we have a fairly recently new, just in power over a year, Labour government. And so it's hit the news and headlines very much at the moment because of new policy that's coming into place, led by the Labour government. But actually, at the end of reception, so the end of when children are 5 in the UK, we have these things called good levels of development. Now, a good level of development is one of the big statements that's come out recently, because our current Education Minister, Bridget Phillipson, has said that by a very short space of time, by in 2 years' time, 75% of all children will achieve a good level of development by the time they reach the end of reception. And this is to get them ready, and we'll discuss that, I'm sure, in depth in a second, for year one, which is what we would call it the official starting of school. So the term after children are 5 years old, they begin the national curriculum. So the early years foundation stage is separate to the national curriculum, and it's what our children in the UK do, well, in England, because there's separate systems in Ireland and Wales. So what we do in England for children until they are the term after their 5th birthday. So the good levels of development, which is the thing that even lots of people in education aren't aware of, were never based on child development. So successive governments over the past several decades have looked at how the UK performs on the world stage, and then they've taken end points and thought, well, if this is the end point where we want all of our adults to be at, so we can be a world leader, how do we get that end point to the beginning so that we start in the right place? So what we've got, the good level development, basically are watered down goals that are not based on child development. They are based on successive government targets that set us on the world stage. And of course, we all want everybody to achieve well and have success. But the other interesting, and it's all very complex, the way that we judge attainment in children. So again, in education, we hear children referred to as more able and less able, which are really dangerous terms, because able in education is about how good you are at reading and writing. So from nursery age, so when you enter the education system, you are categorized in those terms by your ability to read, write, and do maths. And as we know, and as a parent listening to this would know, children are infinitely more than their ability to read and write. And also it's how we enable children to express their knowledge. So at the moment, there are quite a lot of headlines coming out, which are coming seemingly from a good place, which is about all children having the best possible start and the best possible advantage, but they're being based on a set of outcomes that are not linked to child development. So what's going to happen is all the good stuff, all the play-based stuff, all the authentically natural, typical development stuff starts to get squeezed out because we've got this target for phonics and maths and reading and that we've got to hit. So what happens in schools is, and it's not the fault of the practitioners, they're under immense pressure to achieve this 75% target. So everything else stops for the sake of the target. And what we know in terms of child development, so both cognitive child development, physical child development, and more importantly, emotional child development, is if you start too hard too soon, you actually set children backwards. Even the ones you might be referring to as your more ables in inverted commas, although I really don't like that term. I'm just using it for shorthand.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so interesting what you say about kind of it all trickling down. And I think even those of us who worked in secondary feel that pressure as well. So it's interesting to hear you with an early years perspective. But that kind of that international stage that is then influencing policy right down at early years level. And I was thinking as you were talking there that not only is that kind of squeezing childhood and natural development, as you're explaining, but it's also trying to kind of ignore cultural differences around the world and cultural strengths and individual economies, even if you're looking at, children as future workers in an economy, which I also don't really like. But if it is coming from that place, then it kind of ignores any, cultural or individuality,
Absolutely.
specialism in economy or strengths and all that kind of stuff. And is just trying to turn every human into this kind of like commodity.
The cultural differences are massive. So if you look at, say, China as an example of how they educate their children and expectations on their children in terms of attainment, compared to somewhere like Finland or Iceland, compared to somewhere like New Zealand, compared to somewhere like the UK, what you'll find is, well, what I find from my travels is children are children, no matter where you are in the world, but the expectation of what those children should and shouldn't be doing is very culturally based. There's also interesting research about the mental health and well-being of adults in countries that have very formal starts to children's education. So sometimes the argument is given, for example, if we look at children in China, and lots of children in China will demonstrate their ability to function at high-level mathematics stage at very early on in their development. So this is never about saying that we can't, and I use the word train in inverted commas, you can train children to do all sorts of things. Yeah. It's about the damage that's potentially being done in the background when you prioritize academic attainment above things like well-being, resilience, engagement. And a lot of my time, I talk to practitioners about don't confuse compliance with engagement. They're two very different things.
Oh, God.
And
Yeah.
I would always take compliance 1,000,000% over engagement. And as you'll know from working outside, often those behavior issues, and again, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about the word behavior, but those issues that are often flagged as being, antisocial or not what the expectation is within an educational establishment just disappear. They don't exist any longer when you take that same child but change the environment. So that tells you it's not the child, it's the environment that's causing the issue.
Oh, this podcast is made possible thanks to the generous people who support us on Patreon. If you're enjoying the chats that we're doing, if they're improving your practice or you're just finding them interesting, head to patreon.com/the Forest School Podcast. You can support us from as little as £2 a month, and it really does make a huge amount of difference to keeping the lights on, keeping our bills covered, and us being able to find the time to keep interviewing these cool people, read these incredible books, and keep providing this resource to the community. Thanks so much. Bye. Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone the other day where they were talking to me. It was a bit of consultancy work I was doing, and someone had written in some plans that they had some children who really needed to work on their listening skills, and they'd written listening so many times through the plans, and we're going to work on this. And then I was looking back through it, and I went, I can't actually see anything that you've planned that improves oral skills. That you're not listening to birds. Do you mean listening, or do you mean compliance and obedience? Because those are different skills in terms of, like, can they hear you? Yes. Are they doing exactly what you say when you say? No, they're not. But I think there's this shift there in, like you're saying about this trickle down kind of expectations coming through, and it's just such a shame that the expectation isn't to say that schools aren't ready to receive the children, they're not ready to meet the children where they are, but instead going, well, we should change the children earlier so that they're ready for what we want to do when we get there.
Yep, so a really lovely illustration of that point is some fairly recent research talking about the fact that children who shout out in early years settings can't actually help the fact they shout out, because what they haven't yet developed is the part of their brain at the front that suppresses that impulse control that we all learn to do, or most of us learn to do. So what the research was saying, which was really fascinating, was when a child in an early years space shouts out, which is a perfectly normal, typical, expected behavior, the adult then publicly shames that child most of the time, even if they do it nicely, by saying, oh, we put our hands up when we shout out, don't shout out, and it goes that, and that escalates. So if we know that shouting out is a perfectly normal, typical, authentic behavior for the majority of children from birth to 5 years old and a little bit beyond, why are we putting them in situations where when they shout out, we then chastise them for doing what is typical in terms of their development? And that leads into, if you are publicly shaming children for behaving typically, then what they don't do at this stage in their development is go, oh, thank you for that opportunity to reflect on that poor behavior. I'll now rectify that behavior and do it differently. What you do is create an association between the space or the adult or the event with a negative emotion that they can't then always articulate or even know they're experiencing. But the little people have big emotions. So if you are chastising somebody for doing something they can't help doing, but it gives them a very negative association with this event, then what we're beginning to do is layer on, when I walk into this space, my subconscious brain is already on high alert because loads of negative things have happened to me in this space. Not major necessarily, but consistently low-level negative experience when I'm only being my authentic self. And the other risk is that you get children, and there is a gender bias to this, who learn very quickly that being sedentary and being quiet and being compliant pleases the adult. So you get huge groups of children, often but not always girls, who are conditioned from 2 that being quiet and compliant is what is good. And even though they will go on, lots of them, to be very strong and independent women, you are still saying that from 2 years old, the consistent message we give a large group of our children is that when you are quiet, when you are still, when you don't speak out, then that is what pleases the adult. And subconsciously, that's going to start being hardwired for you for the rest of your life. So Carol Dweck, who did some research around growth mindsets, some really interesting stuff. She did some research, started way back in the 70s, and she was looking at language that was used around genders in education. And she found that girls were praised most for sedentary behaviour and compliance, and boys were praised most for how they think and what they say. So, and that was global research, so not just UK-based research. So if that's true, it means there are, and we know, again, a whole other podcast, but we all have subconscious gender bias around what we think and what we do and what we know and what we think we know. But we are, in these environments, actually skewing the opportunities for children unintentionally just by our own subconscious bias towards compliance and an expectation that particular a gender will likely be more compliant because nature made them that way. But the truth is, nature didn't make them that way. We are making them that way.
Yeah.
I really like what you say there about, like, actually it's thinking about the environment, isn't it? Because somebody listening to this who maybe is an early years teacher or a primary teacher might think, well, what's the alternative then? I react that way, or we are as adults, because we need to foster this sense of like calm and quiet so that learning can happen and those kind of things. And you might think, well, okay, what's the alternative? And I guess I'm thinking about the environment, as you were talking about, like changing the environment, that if we're putting these young humans in a situation where they actually are not designed, are not naturally suited to sitting still, being quiet, unless they are basically masking and living up to those adult expectations, that why are we even asking them all to sit on the carpet and listen to one adult? There are other ways to learn, aren't there?
Right.
And what kind of environmental differences are you seeing when you're traveling internationally? Because obviously Forest School is a big alternative here in the UK and in other countries too. But what other kind of things internationally are you seeing that are sort of radically different to that kind of environment of education in early years?
I mean, the one that's oft quoted is the fact in lots of the Scandinavian countries, they don't start formal schooling until they are 7 years old. So they spend a lot of time doing the groundwork at home. And also there's a big, inference push there around the environment, but also valuing the role of parents as carers. So it's a whole different societal structure that allows that to happen. And then you will go to other countries where, especially if they're warmer, that kind of outdoor teaching, outdoor classroom becomes a lot of their day. Well, I mean, I say warmer. I was in Iceland in October, and it was flaming freezing, and I went to a full day outdoor school where they all just come dressed, and they have fire, and there is snow, and it is freezing cold, but they have shelter, and the children are not crying in a corner shivering. What I saw was 3 and 4 year olds who were really good at managing their own temperature, at managing their own behavior, at managing their own environment. So I think it's a culture. There is, if we go back to kind of Lewis's point earlier about listening, if you got the average early years space or school setting and said, right, tell me what is good listening. So, I go and do lots of observations with senior leaders, and they'll say, like somebody said to me the other day about a particular reception teacher, just wait till you see her behavior management. It is exemplary. And when I watched a session, and she was lovely, but I actually walked away thinking, because what she'd got was exemplary ability to get these children to comply. But when we talked about what is good listening, she had a laminate which had key pictures on it that was under our whiteboard. And her whole start to the session was, are you sitting nicely? Are you sitting up straight? Are your legs crossed? Are your arms folded? And she was lovely in the way she did it. Come on, let's show everybody how we sit up nicely. Come on, get those back straight. Are we doing it? You're so good at this. Lots of reinforcement.
I'm doing a worse job than you did at controlling my face.
Yeah.
Just for the...
But then it was all about, that was what good listening was. But then also went to work in another setting up in Cumbria, where it's a school with 2 classrooms. One is reception key stage 1, one is key stage 2. And the adult in the reception key stage 1 classroom, I mean, it's an interesting school in the fact that they don't wear shoes in school. So they wear their feet. It's all about children being comfortable in the space. In their very small Victorian building, they've turned one of their carpet walls into a climbing wall where you can climb up wooden things. There's big ropes that come down from the ceiling so you can actually swing across. They've got things like a reading ledge where you can climb up at 4 and sit on a ledge that, I mean, it's not high, but it's, higher. But when the adult said, I got something I need to talk to you about, you make yourselves comfortable, was the line she used. And I watched children drag a chair, get a cushion, lie on the floor, lie on their stomach, lean against a unit. And while she was talking for about 10, 15 minutes, they shifted about in their space. So they wriggled, they moved position, didn't break her teaching, didn't interrupt anybody else. And at the end, I felt that those children had truly listened. What I'd seen then was good listening, because they were in a state of absorption around what she was saying. And when she finished, they went off and complied with all the things that she talked about. So that for me is good listening. It's the biological version, where you know that good listening means that you are so emotionally and physically secure in your space that all your brain needs to concentrate on is what's going in your ears. Whereas if you're starting to feel emotionally insecure, physically insecure, my bum's numb, I've not wiped my bum since I went to the toilet last, now it's all itchy, all the common issues that you get in early years, I need a wee, all that kind of stuff, or I'm sitting next to somebody I don't like, or all of those things get in the way of that auditory process. So sitting with your legs crossed and your arms folded with your eyes on the adult is not what I would call good listening, but being comfortable and engaged is exactly what I would call good listening.
That's a great example that actually isn't, it's radical, but isn't happening over the other side of the world somewhere in a totally different culture, you know, and it's so simple when you think about it, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
Oh.
So if we were looking then at this idea of like governments wanting, because I think that there is a world in which you need to acknowledge that like people have, I always say that like you just articulated earlier, it's never practitioners that are the ones that are putting these expectations down. Everybody is in this kind of sandwich of like, I was talking on another podcast the other day where I was like, I've never met a teacher that isn't trying their best, but there are people above them that are putting expectations on the teacher. The only levers that the teachers have is to put things into their classroom, and nobody is kind of pushing this way. Why do you think it is? Because for a long time, I've felt like early years practitioners have got, I'm going to say slightly more chutzpah than other, potentially other areas, because they've got this more, for a long time, early years at least, was kind of like observation based, and the age expectations were a lot broader. I can remember only a few years ago when it changed from, when we used to run a kindergarten and there were expectations that were like, if they can do this anywhere between 6 months and 2, you're fine. Don't worry about it. So has the cultural landscape shifted now? Because like those bands are getting more and more narrow. It's like this needs to happen in a 3-month window. Why is early years like getting squeezed so hard in very recent times?
So the earliest foundation stage should be the place where it should be play based. So therefore adults have the maximum opportunity to play. So I often talk about playful teaching, playful learning, and there's a difference between play and being playful. So true play, is when the activity is self-initiated by the child, it's self-chosen, and they are fully invested and engaged in it. So when I set something up for children to come and do, I can't really call it play, because it might be playful, but it hasn't been initiated by them. They're not going to be totally absorbed in what they do. So there are lots of opportunities in early years to be playful, but I see more and more, especially school-based, and especially with the birth of academies and trusts, where they tend to have a very corporate view over. I was working with one very recently with 24 schools in their trust, but the expectation was that every single school and every single reception classroom would look the same, do the same, even the display had to be the same. And of course, across 2 classrooms, you're not going to get exactly the same children. Across 24, you're certainly not. So there is been a shift in education in general, but also, it's more complex. The birth of Ofsted and how Ofsted has, or any inspection body, has kind of morphed over time. People live in fear of that Ofsted inspection. Even though Ofsted might come once a blue moon, still practitioners will talk about doing things for when Ofsted come, or what if Ofsted came. So when I sometimes challenge practice and say, like I was doing the other day, when a little boy didn't come to the carpet story, and the adult was gorgeous and the story was lovely, but the adult was basically saying to the other adult in the room as she's reading the story, like, give another nod. So the other adult really nicely went and found this little boy, kind of ended up cornering him nicely, if you can corner somebody nicely, knelt down, was really smiley and was kind of saying, I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could hear the tone of it. It was all very like, and eventually she kind of cajoled him back to the carpet and he sat on her knee and she kind of put her arms around him, not like squeezy around, just like, you're here and I've got you. And then she did a really annoying thing, but I understand why she did it, where she translated the story for him. So you had the teacher reading the story and you had the other adult retelling the story to one child, which is very distracting. And at the end, the adult who'd had the child was saying, oh, I am knackered. He's got a really bony backside him and he wriggled the entire time. And my question was, why didn't you just leave him? And literally you'd think I'd said, like, shall we strip naked and run around the playground? Because they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, why didn't you just let him? Like, was he clearing your shelves? No. Was he engaged with the story? Yes. Was there another adult here who had eyes on him? Absolutely. Did the whole palaver about getting him back to the carpet actually cause way more disruption? And also, was he happy sitting on your knee? Were you happy with him on your knee? And then the whole rhetoric around that was, but what if a senior leader had come in, say the head, and there's a child just wandering through the space? So we addressed that issue. And then the next question was, but I bet you wouldn't do that if Ofsted were in. And of course, I will always say, well, yes, I would, but I'm not a classroom practitioner any longer. But I said, to be honest, we need to be in a world where if Ofsted walk in or a senior leader and you've got one child or two children who are wandering in your space but causing no trouble, clearly with an adult with an eye on them, the conversation needs to be, talk to me about what was happening here. And you need to be able to say, well, I'm not a clinical psychologist and I'm not diagnosing neurodiversity. What I'm telling you is that particular boy really struggles at this particular stage in his development to be still on the carpet. He learns much better. He engages much better when he's standing up. He engages much better when his hands are in the sand. He's not doing anything to disrupt anybody else. I don't have the situation which is often said to me, well, if you let one wander, then tomorrow at story time they'll all just wander. And the truth of that is, no, they won't. And also, if you say, I'm going to read a story and half your children wander off, then your storytelling is shit and you need to go and work in Tesco's. So it just doesn't happen. What we need to be able to say is that we are representing the authentic development of all children. And if you create an environment that actually, honors the authenticity of all children, neurodiverse or not, then all children will achieve in that space. And what we're tending to do at the moment is create spaces that aren't even authentic for typical development. So if you then add in the concept of neurodiversity, again, latest figures are talking about 1 in 7 children being neurodiverse, often without diagnosis in the early years, because a lot of early behavior and maturity development can be similar to traits of some neurodiversity. So we're not on about diagnosing children or giving them labels. What we're on about doing is creating a space where even the most neurodiverse of children could flourish, but your more neurotypical children will also flourish in that space. And that's the bit that's missing for me.
I've always felt like
Absolutely.
that's the thing that's like when you're in a... It's one of the things that, like, I try not to disparage other forest school practice, because we're in this really interesting situation where forest school is not a protected term. There is obviously the Forest School Association that kind of advocates for what they believe is good practice, but anybody can call anything forest school. And so I have a real chip on my shoulder about when like curriculums start to creep in, about when kind of very directed things start to creep in, because I think there's something very powerful about when you run the way that we run stuff outside. And I make a big deal about everything in the woods being offers, is always, and because we've worked with a lot of people who have a demand avoidant profile, everything is like, hey, I'm going to go make some bread, or hey, I'm going to go play on the swing. So there's no, guys, we're all doing this. We've got to go do the thing. And there's a link there, I think, between, you were just talking about that. I've seen lots of stuff about the difference between play-based learning and playful learning and play, and how actually I've seen a lot of practitioners who are quite upset that the play-based learning has become such a kind of buzzword, because as long as it looks like play, as long as the tough tray looks like playing, they can go, oh yeah, it's play-based, it's not directed. And it's like, well, yeah, but you set all the cows up and said it's a farm and took the nice Instagram picture before, or never after. But it always makes me think that, like, if you are doing authentic play, in that it is intrinsically motivated, self-directed, freely chosen. Those observations of that kind of stuff gives you a way better bit of information about baseline in terms of like, what is someone finding because what people do is they never play particularly below their ability. People play right at that line of like, this is challenging and therefore I find it engaging, whether that's socially challenging and they're playing right at that kind of cusp, or physically challenging and they're playing right at that cusp. But when you let people do it through their intrinsically motivated play, you get a way better sense of like, where is everybody, than, right, if I ask you all to jump, who can jump the furthest? Right, let's write down that. Do you think there's a space in which having people, particularly I think outdoors, doing that intrinsically motivated play is a better space to judge, or not to judge, but to assess like who's coming into the school system, than it is to sit down and go, right, could you all do page 3 of the test manual?
Absolutely it is. And I think, again, it's a cultural shift that's happened over time, even over the kind of 30 odd years that I've been working in early years, even through the decade that I was ahead. It's a huge amount of pressure to have these kind of outcome driven standards. And then, of course, if you are going to be tested against an outcome, you then work towards the outcome, especially if that means that somebody's going to judge you and give you an inadequate judgment, which means people won't send their children to your school, which means you can't get any funding. So it's a cyclical thing, but it's also just the damage gets greater and greater as time goes on. Undoubtedly, I work with some amazing, what I would call play-based settings that are very much led by children's interest. And often the environment is very open. It's often very ambiguous. There will be elements of it that are key. So you will see, there'll be objects or resources or spaces where they invite children to come and engage with a particular thing. But also there will be opportunities for children to go and just find that intrinsic motivation by exploring a space. Because the other thing that play gives you, which is brilliant, is this thing called safe failure. So you will see children all the time, and you will see it in the work that you do, who get it wrong all the time in their play and they don't care. In fact, they quite enjoy the getting of it wrong. And then what they do, because they're motivated, is they come back and do it again. But then what I also see are lots of children who are given an invitation to come and take part in a task, and they get it wrong, or they're sitting on a circle and a circle have to hold up a whiteboard with a letter or a number on it and it's wrong. That kind of getting it wrong isn't safe. That's the kind of getting it wrong that brings the feelings of shame. It's the one that kind of your central nervous system kicks in. You kind of go more into fight or flight, rather than saying, well, I built a massive tower of sticks and it all fell down. And actually, we really enjoyed the clatter and it was quite exciting, got a little buzz from that. So now let's build it even higher. Let's make the clatter even bigger. That is the kind of playful learning that actually invites children to not only develop curiosity and well-being and resilience, but that idea of failure being a way of learning better, as opposed to failure being something that tells you don't go back and do that again.
Are you thinking of working outdoors in a way that's actually authentic and meaningful? Our Forest School Leader course isn't just a conveyor belt of trainees getting trained and sent off into the world with no support. It's something that changes how you see people, community, and nature. Across 10 practical in-person days, you'll pick up everything you need to hold space for people and to facilitate authentically deep and meaningful Forest School experiences. We cover so much stuff on this course, like child development, practical skills, and how to offer a calm, non-judgmental approach that people in nature really need. It's a course that can meet you wherever you are in your learning journey, whether you're already working outside, working in education, or you're somebody who just wants to change. We tailor all of our teaching and learning experiences so that they meet the diverse range of needs of students that are coming to us on any given course. We hope that people finish the course not just qualified, but also feeling secure that they have had the time and space to develop their own personal pedagogy, their own approach to Forest School that they can then take with them out into the world. If that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, then why not come and grab your spot on one of the most inclusive, authentic and meaningful Forest School courses around. Search for Children of the Forest Forest School Training online, or check out the links in this video's descriptions.
Yeah, I really liked what you were saying about that whole process of like, oh, but what if Ofsted see? Like, you might have that gut feeling that this is the right thing for your kids that you're working with, and then that like voice, and then your SLT are also in that place. And I was thinking back to my own teaching days in secondary, and how since leaving, reflecting on the training that we were given whilst in post rather than in teacher training, and the training that we receive, annual kind of inset days, or you're sent off on a course, or someone comes in, it increasingly became that all of the training was Ofsted focused. So the last training I went on before I was just like, I quit now, was, we have to demonstrate to Ofsted that progress has been made. So you will use this colour pen to demonstrate, so that when Ofsted come in and ask the question, how do you absolutely prove on paper that progress has been made with your children, not just over a year or over a term, but over one lesson? How do you definitely prove that with data? Oh, well, look at I've used purple pen here. So that's how, as opposed to, for example, training on neurodiversity that was either completely absent or very outdated for about half an hour of an entire inset day. So when you're talking about things that very much align with our forest school ethos and our practice ethos, so talking about the central nervous system, talking about neurodiversity, talking about feeling safe in your body, all these kind of holistic things, that side of teaching, I feel, just isn't there for most people. It's almost like if you have the interest and the motivation and the time, the money to read about it or to go and seek training yourself, then you might start learning about neurodiversity, in a more up-to-date way. You might learn about central nervous system and regulation and things like that. But when it's not part of generalized mainstream teacher training or updating and things, it becomes then very hard. Like, ideally, as you described, each practitioner would have the knowledge and the confidence and the faith in their practice to stand up to SLT and to Ofsted, and then hopefully SLT would also stand up to Ofsted and go, yep, you might be looking at this and thinking that doesn't meet my expectations of what good listening looks like or good learning looks like, but I know my kids, back off, I'm doing the right thing. But when it's not supported for each practitioner, and again, as time goes on, I'm kind of really worried by the fact that most practitioners are people who have done well in the current educational system and climate. They are the people who have succeeded through this kind of culture. So they become the teachers who then want to kind of, even if it's subconscious, recreate the educational conditions that they
It worked well
in.
For me. This is, and I'm successful.
Exactly.
It's that self-narrative, isn't it?
Totally. Why can't you just sit still on the carpet? How do we change the landscape there when it's not even... Because I really love that idea of like, don't leave the system, because Lewis and I both left the system. It's like, and I felt a lot of guilt about that, about like, well, how could I try and stay and try and change the system from the inside, but I'm just burnt out now and I can't. Sorry, that's not really a question. That's just a sort of ramble.
No, it's really tricky, and it is about trying to change the system from the inside out. And sometimes I work with pockets of practice that are just amazing. I always think, and again, it's weirdly to do with being a parent, and even though my boys are all grown up now, I go to settings and think, would my boys have loved it here? Because as a parent, what I tried to do was to raise really independent, curious, free-thinking, slightly challenging, often annoying children. And I managed that really well. I didn't say it. We managed that as a family really well. But when those same children, I sent them to my school where I was head, which was a very difficult decision to make, but it was one that I think, looking back, was probably the right one, because I created a school that was very much around my ethos around education, although it was by no means perfect. And they flourished in that because it was all about creativity, and it was all about voice, and it was all about, and once you've been ahead for a decade, you get a little bit braver in terms of being able to say to the local authority, well, no, we just don't do that here, and I can show you why we don't. But the further through the school system they went, especially once they hit secondary school, that independence, that voice, that uniqueness was not valued in any way, shape or form. So I had my eldest son was often on report for low-level disruption for doing things like questioning the teacher. And they would say, well, he questioned the teacher. And I was like, well, it's really hard also as a parent then not to go in like just, my son. I was like, but yeah, because he felt what was happening was unjust, or he felt that what was happening was unreasonable, and he wasn't trying to be rude. He wasn't swearing at you, he was just asking a question. So if I talk to my boys now about their education, they will talk about how the further through it they got, the more disillusioned they became. And even though they were all bright and articulate, they were very much pushed down one route, which was the academic route. You have to go and do this because you are bright. And that actually the school system just squeezed the life and love out of learning that they'd had kind of earlier on. My concern is that you see more and more of that creeping down into what should be the most playful, joyous part of turning children on to learning. And that idea that somebody said to me a long, long time ago, it's not what you learn, it's how you feel about being a learner that is the most important thing. So again, I often talk to practitioners about, how do you think your children feel? Like, let's just run through your day. I'm not talking about you and your personality, because I've met you and you're lovely and you're really warm with your children. But when we are sitting on the carpet for 30 minutes and we're still sitting for 30 minutes and you've now told 4 children off, and one of them you've even moved their peg from the smiley sun onto the sad cloud, and or you've pulled them on the traffic lights, so how does that make you, or how do you think that makes them feel? And that can be really powerful in terms of just trying to think how that emotional state that these very emerging brains are in is so powerful that if they start having those negative feelings that we've talked about before, even though I'm not on about children who are crying on the carpet, I'm on about children who, when the adult says, everybody stop, come to the carpet, you can see them go, oh, because they know what's coming is not going to be good. That is the beginnings then of a disillusionment with learning, with education, that will just follow them through the school. And the further up they get and the tighter the reins get, the more disillusioned they become. And then they start to do that thing that they do, where they then begin to act out. So all they're doing is their innate kind of central nervous system is just responding to what is happening around them. So you get what we call bad behaviors. So those children then get othered. So they become that child. And then those children become that child all the way through. And therefore, they don't get offered the same opportunities. They don't get the same language. They don't get the same expectation. And a lot of this is linked to how basic human brains function. We can't help sometimes othering. We do it all the time. In our social groupings, we other. Always, from society, you always look for the weak link, because when you establish a weak link that isn't you, it makes you not the weak link. So as human beings, we do that, but also subconsciously, we do it with children in our care, unless we actively push against it. And what you see is children who are often being very typical, neurotypical, or neurodivergent, but typical in their development, put into an environment that doesn't honor that typical development. So that makes them stand out as atypical, when actually they're not atypical at all. Yeah. They're just doing what they should be doing at this stage in development. It's the space that doesn't allow it. And that's the bit we have to chip away at and challenge. And you're right, Wem, in terms of training, like student training, it would be really good to get it's getting better. It is getting way better as our knowledge of neurodiversity is growing. Ofsted training, again, that is getting better over time. It used to be that you could be inspected in the early years by a secondary math specialist who would come down and say, well, if they're all sitting nicely, great, well done. Or you would get somebody who had a particular view and say, well, you're not doing phonics 3 times a week, for an hour a day on the carpet, therefore you don't get. So that is getting better, but it's just such a slow tanker to turn. Yeah. It seems to be taking forever.
Even when we... Sorry, can I just quickly say, when we ran our own kindergarten, we were even told by the Ofsted person who came and did the pre-opening visit, pre-registration visit. So she's with us for several hours, checking the setting, checking that we know what we're talking about. And she was just like in love with the whole idea of this outdoor kindergarten and forest school. But she said, you'll just need to be really careful about, just really aware of what Ofsted inspector you're going to get, because you could get somebody who is completely down with it, or you could get someone turning up in business wear, even though they know it's an outdoor setting, who freaks out about the fact that you let kids climb trees. And the way you were saying about people being terrified of Ofsted, I was that practitioner, 100%. And that's one of the reasons why we don't even do early years anymore, because I was her words, and she was Ofsted, she was the person, and saying you might get someone who absolutely loves this and gives you outstanding, or you might get somebody who closes you down.
It shouldn't be that lottery, should it? It should not be that lottery.
Alistair, I was going to ask, because I think so. The majority of our listeners, and the majority of forest school in the UK is done in school settings. We're very unique that we've got our own site and we have all this, like, I often think of it as like a petri dish where we can go and try these weird things and then share it with people and go, this worked, do you want to see a bit of it? But for people that are in school settings, I know that one of the challenges that they often face is one kind of a creeping of expectations that in forest school, they want to see development through forest school, whether that's through like, we need to see fire lighting going up, or like, I want to see their social improvements. But the other one that I often hear is people saying that forest school is being used, and the term that they use, we've used the word squeezed about early years a lot in this conversation, and the conversation that they have is often about forest school being a pressure valve, that they go, and almost that expectation or that view maybe that school settings might have, where they go, well, we push, particularly this is a year 6 thing, I think, we push them really hard Monday to Thursday, and then on a Friday, we give them art in the morning and forest school in the afternoon. And that is seen as an acceptable, we did it. It's so discreet, but how do we challenge that narrative about not compartmentalizing, like, mental health is on Friday and Monday to Thursday, eat shit.
Yeah, literally. It massively devalues what things like forest school can offer. And again, you talked about earlier, Lewis, I go to loads of forest school settings, and I was in one fairly recently where the forest school activity was to go down to a little copse, feed Stickman, and then in pre-selected resources, including A4 paper from the school office, to print stick a version of Stickman with some sticks that the adult had collected for them and some leaves onto a piece of paper, and then take it home. And then, of course, that went home to parents as, today we went to forest school and we did a forest school activity. And also, settings aren't daft. They know that parents will buy into the forest school ethos, and well, they should, because you would want your child to be there. But then there are other preschools, nurseries that I work with are completely outside or 80% outside, and they would do what you would call like authentic forest school work. Or when I was in Australia last, they have bush kindy, which is a bit like forest school on acid. And so I thought I was quite well versed in kind of, risky forest school play. And then you find yourself out in the bush with 4-year-olds who are climbing massive trees with poisonous spiders in, or standing waist deep in a creek trying to get logs to float past. And there's nobody standing there with a risk assessment going, get out of the water, get out of the water. And when 4-year-olds are going, yeah, there's probably a poisonous spider in the tree, but we know what to do. We have to, you're like, but there's a poisonous spider in the tree. So I think there's a whole bigger discussion around what is authentic, like what's authentically play, what's authentically forest school. But there is a massive PR job for settings around, we have a forest school, whatever that may be. But you're right, there's also that idea that mental health only happens on a Friday. And actually what it's not seeing the same with foundation stage is that if you do it well, the benefits to physical, mental, emotional development are huge, but also how children learn, how they apply what they know, all those opportunities, like you said before, to be able to observe, to share, to play alongside, you find out so much more. And ultimately what I see through quality play is same as, forest school experience, is high levels of engagement, and engagement is your route to progress and attainment. So if you can't see the progress, you're probably assessing the wrong things. So if you are looking for, are they better at lighting fires? Yeah, around safety, you want to know that children are making safe choices, but that's not what we should be looking for here. What we should be looking for is not their ability to count conkers and add those two numbers together to create a sum. What we should be looking for are children's skill level, their social interaction, their ability to be creative and critical thinkers. I mean, the amount of critical thinking, true creative and critical thinking that happens in a forest school or even in an outside environment, as opposed to sitting around a table with some tiddlywinks, is just insurmountable. But yet, often sitting with your tiddlywinks is seen as learning because you can count one more, one less, whatever it may be. Just being outside, building a den out of some sticks, is not seen in the same way, but it's infinitely more powerful. And if you're really good at that stuff, then the tiddlywinks sits nicely on the top if and when you ever want to do tiddlywinks. Mm-hmm. But it's that fundamental personality, resilience, curiosity building. That's the magic that happens in something like a forest school setting that just often doesn't happen in that indoor environment.
Yeah, and I think there's such a value in, as you say, seeing children in a different light. So a lot of the time when we used to deliver forest school in schools and we turn up with our, van full of stuff and and take the space and take the children. Some teachers, either through choice or they were able to, would come out and be at forest school with their class, and other teachers would take that time to be indoors, work with one child, or do marking, or just take a break, whatever. And I would always really, really hope that the teachers could at least spend a bit of the time out with us at forest school, just seeing their children in a completely different light, because all those qualities that you're describing would really come to the surface for many children who you'd learn through teaching assistants who might be with you, who would sort of show surprise at what some children were doing, because they'd go, oh God, in the classroom, he or she is just bouncing off the walls, or they never listen, or they're always getting timeouts, all this kind of thing. And then you see this child flourishing in this new way, and you think, oh, I just wish their teacher could see them in this environment, because then you're seeing so many other qualities other than these very rigid expectations of the classroom, and even the benefits for the child teacher relationship in that is huge, absolutely
And
huge.
adults love it. And I think it's also really good for adults' physical and mental health to be outside and do. The acid test for me is always, if you say to a group of children, a group of 4-year-olds, phonics is cancelled today, nobody cries. But if you say forest school's been cancelled today, they're like, oh no, we love it. That tells you everything you need to know. If they were saying the same about phonics, you might think differently, but usually they're cheering if phonics has been cancelled. So there is, I've talked about this in my work as well, around adult mental health in education. And as practitioners, we've alluded to it already, we're under massive amounts of pressure. But also that in your day-to-day, if you can be outside in nature with children, really experiencing the joy of play, it's also really good for your soul. And you tend to find that adults who do come out into those spaces absolutely love it and massively engage with it. And that's why it can't be, let's all go outside and sit around in a circle while somebody else makes nettle tea, puts it into a polystyrene cup, and you all have a little taste and spit it out. That's not forest schools. Whereas having that experience and time just to be in, even if it is just a small copse at the bottom of your field, just that time to be in nature is genuinely good for us as human beings and resets you for when you do have to go back into that space and do the thing that you're also contractually obliged to do.
Yeah, I think as long as you can step outside of your persona in the classroom, like there's lots of people who you've probably come across them, change their name when they're out of forest school. They were Mr. or Mrs. something in the classroom, and now they're called Bluebell or Tawny Owl or something, to make that distinction. Because I think even those of us who kind of have stepped away from education and gone, I'm just doing forest school now, still have this kind of, I guess it is a form of institutionalization of like the expectations of, you say like, oh, they're just playing or they're just outside, that we feel that kind of, oh, I should be doing something, I should be providing more.
It's
and it
really
takes quite
tricky.
a while for that to really embed, and for you to actually shift your lenses actually, and to go, I'm facilitating this space and all these great things that we've been describing are happening here. It isn't my duty to make the children progress in this set way. So I've worked with TAs in forest school who obviously felt that pressure to be doing something, to be seen to be doing something, whether that was about safety or about like play in this way or engage in this activity. And you have to kind of try and explain the ethos to them a little bit and hope that they can relax into it to also access those benefits for themselves. But it does take time, doesn't it?
It does. And what you tend to find is adults develop how many Tourette's. So you're out in a forest school space and literally you've got an outdoor space, and it's always like, how many sticks are in here? How many conkers? How many seeds? What colour is this? It's that kind of constant questioning. And children are not stupid. So they know that if they come to an adult, or an adult comes into their space and it's preceded by a question, then that's not what we're here for. So, and does it really matter if I know how many conkers that I've made in my kind of fairy kingdom that I've just created? That's not what this is about. So I think you're right. It is a cultural shift. But then if you're really going to invest in a forest school ethos for your setting, because you really believe it's going to be a powerful enabler for children, that's part of that investment, that you also have to invest in the culture that underpins forest school. And it's not just about doing activities in the bushes. It's about an actual whole experience that's going to feed children differently.
Oh, mate, Alistair, I'm really conscious of time, because I could genuinely chat to you for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and we would put the whole world to right, I'm sure, by the end of it.
Definitely would.
But I wanted to ask, just maybe this is like as a last thing. Obviously, I think there's a huge overlap. Forest School initially came to the UK as an early years practice, and I've always thought that one of the main things that early years and Forest School both hold really highly is this kind of thing about autodidactic learners and people that can teach themselves, can do things through exploration, and that really gets kind of hammered as soon as you hit key stage 1. So I wondered, maybe for people that are listening who either are working in early years or in Forest School, do you have any advice on what they could be doing to sort of advocate for that sort of autodidactic style in the rest of the school system?
Don't think education is set up for that in any way, shape or form. So everything that we do,
we'll call it a day there then. All right, nice to...
So I think partly, and again, we talk about institutionalized approaches to teaching or being a practitioner, and we've all been fed through that same sausage machine in some way, shape or form. So partly, if you are listening to a podcast like this, you're probably somebody that reflects on your practice quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know through my entire teaching career, there were always little nagging voices that I often ignored. But if you are seeking out information, it's probably because you've got a little state of discomfort sitting in you or somewhere where you think, I know this is not right, or I know this could be better. Or you go out for a walk yourself and just think, blimey, that's so good for my mental health and well-being. We need more of this in our lives. But fundamentally, you've got to find that seed within yourself that says, I know this doesn't feel quite right, but I maybe don't understand why. And then it's about this really enjoyable quest that you can go on, where you can find lots and lots of like-minded people that will share with you not just opinion, which is great, but also the science and research around how children's brains cognitively develop, the fact they aren't all fully formed by the time that they are 2, 3, 4, 5. There are different bits that are still development. How children physically develop. So you need that core muscle strength. You need that ability to balance. You need the proprioception. You need all of those things that come from moving your body, not keeping it still. And then that underlying thing that underpins everything, which is that engagement, that enthusiasm, that curiosity. And if we can put children in spaces where there is an unlimited opportunity for them to be curious, and outdoors provides way more opportunity for that than even the best indoor environment, because outdoors is changing with the weather, it's changing with the clouds, you can see different shapes, you see different things, you've got live things that move, seasons change it. So ultimately, the outdoor space was the original classroom. If we go way back to how we were as cave people and how we learned to survive as human beings, we did that in the outdoors. So we are, as a species, pre-programmed to respond well to those kind of spaces. They've just been squeezed out of us over time. So I think at the moment, it tends to be, with practitioners I work with, more of a personal journey. Ultimately, we need to get to the policymakers, like the Bridget Phillipsons of this world, people who are advising government, and it needs to become policy. The issue, as with everything, is neoliberalism, and also the fact that, it makes money. Governments need to make money, and going out and sitting in the forest doesn't feel like it's going to make you any money. It might make you a way healthier society, but it actually probably won't put loads of money in the bank in the way that our society is currently set up. So it's little wonder that the pendulum always swings. I mean, there's a writing document that's non-statutory, but it's just been released very, very recently. And two of the people advising on the content of that document both have published writing schemes that they sell into schools. So when the government is taking advice, what the government said was they didn't charge for their advice, so therefore that was okay. But if you are taking advice on how to teach children to read and write from people who've got published writing schemes that they sell to education, that's the biggest battle that we need to fight. But ultimately, I think all of us as human beings want the best outcomes for the children in front of us. And if you feel that you've got a knot, or you've got something that doesn't feel quite right, or you're constantly having that discussion about why can't they just sit still, then this is the kind of journey you just need to explore, because this is where your answers are going to be.
That's a great place, a kind of inspirational place, I think, to leave this for listeners. Thank you so much for your time, Alistair. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, you've got a Substack, haven't you, I think?
Yeah, so we've got a website which is just abcdoes.com. ABC, not because it's education, but for Alistair Bryce-Clegg. That's often a moment of enlightenment. Somebody said to me the other day, I followed you for 20 years and I didn't realise the ABC was your initials. ABC does, but yeah, and that links to the Substack, where I spend many a happy hour pontificating at length about all of the stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your recent article. I think it was recent about the girls and boys and praise, which we did touch on a bit in this episode. So that was really interesting.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So much.
You're very welcome.
Bye.